I had a client who wanted me to record one of my dynamic warm-ups just raw and leave all the little idiosyncrasies in there and just make it raw. So I thought it could just be a useful video. So basically, this is me just starting off with some cat cows. So just focusing on my spine as a whole, but really my thoracic spine. So basically from like the base of my neck to like the bottom of my rib cage, just focusing on thoracic extension. That's just because I spend a decent amount of the day sitting, and so this just kind of helps to get some of that range of motion back, which helps with better positioning when I squat. And just the flow of like my warm-ups in general. Like typically I like to start with like the lowest intensity stuff and then work my way progressively and get more and more and more intense. So by the end, that's when I'm like doing like, you'll see like high knees and things like that. One of the reasons for that is, I mean, there's a few, but one of the main ones is it just sometimes makes it easier to get into the workout. Sometimes it's less jarring. Like if I'm not really feeling like training, sometimes it's easier just to start with something simple like this on the ground and just start by warming up my spine. It's very low intensity, focusing on my breathing, stuff like that. It just makes for an easy way to like get into the actual training session. The other thing I'm doing with the cat cows and then these protraction, retraction, which I'm about to move into, is I'm warming up my wrist, like my wrist extension in a way. So it doesn't really do a ton for like this workout in particular, but like when I do my handstand practice and some of my stuff like that, this is a nice way to like do two things at once. One, warm up my spine, and also warm up my wrist. So these are just protraction, retractions. Again, another super low intensity exercise. Basically, my thought process with this one is I'm trying to just primarily isolate like the movement of my shoulder blades, like pinching my shoulder blades together and then pushing them forward. And so what I think about when I do this is when I pinch them together, I imagine there's like something between my shoulder blades, and I imagine I'm trying to squeeze that thing. So like imagining there's like somebody's fingers like between my shoulder blades, and I'm trying to pinch their finger with my shoulder blades. And then when I go to like push my shoulder blades forward, what I think about is like my hands are on the ground and I'm thinking about like pushing the world or the earth away from me. And those two thought processes tend to make it pretty easy to get the movement in my shoulder blades that I want. These right here, again, just staying on the ground, low intensity. I really like these. They're basically, I'll call them hip circles. There might be a different name, but basically what I'm focusing on is the head of my femur just rolling around in my hip socket. And so what I'm doing is my pelvis I'm trying to keep like my pelvis stationary. So I'm not trying to like roll to my side, or you'll see that like I put my hands on my shin and I pull my knee towards me. I'm trying to keep all of the movement in my actual hip and not in like rotating my pelvis, flexing my pelvis, anything like that. And starting off, again, it's all this is pretty slow. It's just a way to warm up my hips in a way that's still dynamic. And also, probably the best way to put this is like, I'll start by keeping my leg, maybe like my knee pretty bent. And then as kind of my hip gets more warmed up, I will extend my knee more, just because like that makes the lever longer, which means it's going to be more intense. So, and it sounds a little weird, but basically you'll see these first couple of circles, I don't really extend my knee all the way. I keep my knee pretty bent even when my leg's away from me. And then as I get more and more warm, that knee starts to extend more and more and more, and that just makes the stretch more intense. And just in general, like typically this, I think this video ends up being around, this warm-up ends up being around 15 minutes. This is typically on the longer side in terms of like dynamic warm-ups for me. It's just because it's a lower body day. So it feels like there's more to do. Like upper body days, I could warm up a bit faster than lower body days. But I'm also like slower to warm up anyway. Like I like to, I don't know, I like to kind of like stew in this process for a little bit. It makes it easier to like transition away from whatever I was doing and to like get myself in the right headspace to train. Because I'd say along with like getting my body ready, like the warm up for me, a huge part of it is getting my mind ready, getting myself in the right headspace to train. And so sometimes if I make it a little bit longer and I just kind of simmer in it for a while, it makes it easier to like make that transition. Because one of my goals is by the time that I finish this dynamic warm up that I'm ready physically and mentally, I'm ready to train and I'm not thinking about work or anything else that I was thinking about before I came to the gym. So now off the floor, just doing some arm circles. And with these, just like the hip circles, is I'm thinking about like the head of my humerus just rolling around inside of like the socket, my shoulder, the socket of my shoulder. So that's why I'm not super concerned about my elbows being straight or bent. Like really, like as I'm doing this, I'm visualizing the head of my humerus rolling around inside the socket. I'll do forward arm circles. I'll do backward arm circles. And with those, and with all of this stuff, I start off with a smaller range of motion, and as I get more and more warmed up, so as the reps go on, I'll start to increase the range of motion naturally, and a lot of times, depending on the actual exercise, I'll also increase the speed. So like basically, regardless of what it is, I will start with a smaller range of motion, progressively get to a larger range of motion as it naturally kind of gets more warmed up, and then with certain things I'll increase the speed. So now just doing some leg swings. With these, it's kind of the same thing with the hip circles. I'm trying to get most of the movement in my hips and not get a ton of like rotation of my pelvis. You'll see here there is some rotation just because it's a pretty dynamic movement. But I am trying to warm up my hips and not necessarily like turn my whole spine, my whole torso to the side. So I'm trying to keep, like that's why you notice like my head, my upper back, and as much as possible my leg, all of it stays pretty straight ahead. But I mean, there is some rotation, some twisting happening there. I alternate between two ways of doing this. Sometimes if you look at my foot, sometimes I will just keep my foot, and again, not to get overly technical, like feel free to like toss all this out and just play around. I'm just kind of saying my approach, my thoughts as I do this stuff. But I will keep sometimes I'll keep my foot just like this, basically just keeping my foot straight towards the wall the whole time. Other times I'll do toe points. So as my leg comes in, I will point the toe to my inward, and as my leg comes out, I will point my toe away from me. So instead of being just keeping my leg like this, I will do in and out, and I've just noticed like it allows for like, especially when I go out, like a greater stretch on my groin, like my adductors when I do toe points out, and even like a little better stretch like on my glutes when I do toe points in on the way in. The only tricky part with that one is that doing the toe points makes it even easier to rotate my pelvis and shift my focus away from my hips and get more of that rotation, which I'm not really after. But I do like the toe points. So these are just more leg swings, just forward to backwards. And again, there is some movement of my hips, but primarily I'm trying to keep it isolated. I mean, there's some movement of my pelvis, but I am trying to keep it isolated within my hips. So when I come forward, I'm thinking about like kicking, like contracting my hip flexors, but also keeping my pelvis, trying to keep my pelvis from rolling. And when I come back, the same thing. I'm trying to basically contract my glutes and try to minimize like any arching in my back. We're past it now, but if you go back and watch it, there is a little bit of like arching, a little bit of like, I guess a little bit of hyperextension would be a better word because there's already a natural arch. Like there is a little bit of hyperextension in my low back, but I'm trying to keep it isolated within my hips. Just basically jumping rope without a rope to warm up my calves and my Achilles tendon. Fingers, just warming them up. Just being weird, talking to myself, trying to kind of hype myself up just to get ready. Yep. So more some crossbody arm swings, some jump roping. And with a lot of this stuff, like you'll notice if you just look at my eyes, or what you can see, like I'm trying to basically stare straight ahead the whole time. So I like it if when possible to where it's like there's just a wall in front of me where there's not a bunch of movement happening, or it's like I'm not at an angle. I just like to be basically where I'm in a good position with like good lighting and like a good flat wall behind me so I can visualize. Because with all of this stuff, like I said, I'm thinking about those different things, and so I want to be able to, the less movement going on and like the less like weird angles and mirrors and stuff, the easier I found for me, the easier just to visualize. So that's what's happening there. That's why you'll notice I'm just basically looking straight ahead with a neutral neck the whole time. Warming up my wrists. You can tell my body temperature is increasing and getting warmer. Took my hoodie off, doing some butt kicks. Just some stretching, just seeing how things feel, seeing if they feel loose. Also giving my body kind of a chance to catch up. So I'll do those little breaks, occasionally, like when I'll do a few exercises, and if I feel like, okay, let me just chill for a second, let things catch up, now I'll go back to it. And so we've noticed that, the intensity of the exercises and just the pace of everything is increased. So I started off on the ground super slow. Now, high knees, and just kind of keeping this little circuit going to some jumping jacks. And with those jumping jacks, just focusing on my shoulders and my hips, not necessarily worrying about my elbows. And this, I saved this for the end this time just because with all that hopping around, my calves are a little bit warmer. The Achilles tendon's a little bit warmer, so it's a little easier to stretch it. I can get a little bit better of a stretch, but all this is basically, I just call it a catcher stretch. And if you'll notice, my heels are off the ground right now, and my weight is on the balls of my feet. And I'm just thinking about stretching like my Achilles tendon, my calf. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm about to squat. It's just, I found that I don't need to do a ton of like static stretching on my calves before I train, because I do wear shoes with an elevated heel, but it does help to at least spend like 30 to 60 seconds down here just kind of moving around and just warming up my calves, stretching them, stretching that tendon. And that's just me putting my weight forward. When I put more weight forward like that, that's going to put more, as long as I keep my weight on the balls of my feet and don't shift it to my toes, as long as I keep it over the balls of my feet, that's going to increase the intensity of that stretch and give me a better stretch. And this is the last thing. So I got my shoes on now, my squat shoes with elevated heels, and these are just some squats, and I'm holding that kettlebell as like a counterbalance, and this is just to warm up that squat pattern, because that's going to be that was my first exercise that day, was the squat. So just getting super specific now so I can transition to from these right into the barbell back squat. And yeah, I think that is about it. That's my flow. Lowest intensity to highest intensity, finishing with the stuff that's most specific to the actual like first exercise I'm about to do that day. And it varies on the day. I mean, there's some days it takes me longer to warm up, some days it takes me less. It just depends on what I'm training. Like I said, lower body's a bit longer than upper body. If it's colder in the gym, if I'm more tired, sometimes it takes me longer to warm up. And that's it.